Alright, in this video we're going to cover the main troubleshooting techniques and methods you should use to troubleshoot an existing GPU miner. This does not cover what to buy, how to build it, or any of the setup. This is strictly, you've had a system running for a while, something happened, and you're having a hard time fixing it. So some of the problems that this video is going to address are, number one, the computer shuts off or restarts when the miner starts up. Number two, the GPUs are not detected at all. So maybe you had all 6 GPUs running, or how many ever you have. After a restart, they're gone. Number three, GPUs and the device manager have the yellow warnings indicating that there's an error or a fault in one of the cards. Sometimes it does a shuffle dance where multiple GPUs will have the yellow warning labels, and then it will go one by one flickering, and then eventually they'll all the warnings will all go away. You restart your computer or start your miner, and it seems to run fine, but then later on it crashes again. So that's also a problem that we'll be addressing. And number four, your mining software crashes due to GPU loss, missing table IDs, missing devices, crashed GPU. And number five, your miner or computer randomly crashes, and that covers all the crashes. And then number six, what I'm going to refer to as fake blue screens. These sometimes indicate you have a problem with your graphics driver. They could be memory management errors or other error codes that come up with blue screens. Your Windows system does not know how to handle the GPU mining, so it will put off these fake errors, I'm calling them. But really, if you were to research, memory management error, it would have you troubleshooting your RAM, running like memory test, and it probably, most likely, when you're doing GPU mining, it has nothing at all to do with your memory or your RAM or the drivers or a lot of the stuff that it's error coding on. It's simply that your graphics cards are improperly configured or something went wrong in that. So those are the main issues that we're going to look to solve, and now let's cover the troubleshooting order. So the leading cause of almost all, I'm talking 95% of the issues that you're going to face when an existing miner goes down, it's going to be by burnt cables or connectors that are caused by either improper cable setup, random surges of power, or incorrect usage of adapters. So start with the SATA cable. Most SATA cables have 3, this one has 4 connectors on it. That does not mean connect 4 devices to this. At most, you should connect 2. I started connecting only 1. I've had one of my 1500 watt PSU, my power supply, have a burnt out cable with just one of these SATA ports connected to the riser, and the other one connected to a SATA hard drive. That seems ridiculous, but the actual cable burnt. So when you inspect these cables looking for damage, obviously you can see whether or not the cables are melted or frail, but the key to troubleshooting SATA cables is you actually have to pull them out from the PSU. I've noticed that the connectors will actually burn into the back of the power supply, and that's something that took me a while to figure out. The way to just quickly test it is to go ahead and shut your system down and just pull them out one by one. If it's stuck, trust me, you'll know. You'll hear like a crunching sound, maybe a cracking, and then the piece of plastic probably is going to break off inside your PSU, meaning you're going to have to take your PSU apart and scrape the pin. If you look closely, I don't even know if you can see that, but the top half of one of those pins is the metal exposed, the connector is exposed. The plastic actually just broke off and is actually stuck in the PSU right now. So this cable's bad. I have to fix that port on the power supply to use it again. Have to get a new cable. These burnouts are hard to detect. If you don't actually take these out, you can't visually see them. And what happens is if they're sitting in there, the computer and the miner can look fine. It can recognize your card, but as soon as you try to transfer any type of power or heat through this broken or degraded connection, I guess, it may trip, short, or cause random crashes. So on the SATA cables, try to do it with 1. I know budgeting is a big thing, so max 2 on these. And you should be using powered risers. These red ones here are really good from Amazon. They have an LED light that shows that they're getting power. One thing you can do is they make these Molex cables. Sometimes it's just 1 Molex to a 6-pin or 2 Molex to a 6-pin. This is a 2 Molex to an 8-pin, so it's not for the riser. All my cables are in use, but you can get one of these that's 6-pin, and you can plug it into your Molex cable, because usually you'll have, like, depending on the power supply, you have 2 or 3 SATA cables, 2 or 3 accessory cables with the Molex connectors. So you can use those to actually power these risers, which will not have you overloading the SATA cables. One of the big mistakes that I made when I started out is I ran out of basically PCI because I was trying to use a 1,000 watt power supply, power an entire system. I ran out of PCI Express power, so what did I do? I didn't even get this cable. This is later. This is actually, this will actually work for one card, a smaller card. But I had a Molex, I think 2 Molex to 6-pin, and then I bought these adapters. You'd think that, hey, they don't make adapters that you can't use for this for specific purposes, right? If they made the adapter, it should work. That's absolutely wrong. If I had two Molex to a 6-pin, I was plugging it into a 6-pin female, so like that, right? On the ends of this is 2 6 or 8 pins. So I'm coming off 2 Molex into basically 2 small graphics cards or 1 big graphics card. This will burn out so quickly. It will melt. One of them almost started a fire when I did this. Some of them on the smaller cards actually ran for a little while, but then they cause those random system crashes and errors. So don't do this at all. If you need to extend a PCI Express, they do make PCI Express power. They do make the 8-pin female adapter, and that does split into 6 or 8. You won't really run into problems burning this cable out. I mean, unless you daisy chain them, but don't daisy chain them. You don't even really want to use these unless you absolutely have to, like as an emergency situation, until you get another power supply or a different type of solution. But you're going to run into probably more of power limits. Like, most power supplies have probably 8 connectors. Some have 6. My 1500 watts have 10 8-pin connectors that come off of the power supply. If you start popping these in and turn that 10 into 20, you're going to hit your limit on your power supply, and that's going to cause instability, or it'll just shut down your computer when you try to run it. So one thing I started doing is I no longer skimp on PSU's power supplies. I get more than I need. So if I'm going to be running 900 watts, I used to, in the old days, I get 1,000 watt, get a bunch of adapter cables, and try to make that run the whole system. Now I will throw 1,500 watt on there with another power supply. I'll basically have double. That's a really good metric to keep your stuff from overheating or cause damage through cables and burn. This is what you're looking for when you're troubleshooting these cables. If you just pull lightly, they will come right out. If they're burnt, you can see the browning on the end of those, and then they're fragile. So what they're doing is they're actually sitting in that connector, and if you don't notice the brown burn marks on it and you just keep running, it may come up for a little while. There's still a little bit of connectivity here, a little bit of power can still pass through, but as soon as that heats up, you're going to have a bad time. It's not going to work. So in very rare cases, when you're looking at cables, these risers can go out. There was a point in my mining career, I guess, where I had a pile of risers because I kept blaming the risers. Some motherboards, if you have, say, more than 2 things hooked to a SATA cable, that initial power surge will stop it from recognizing the GPU. Instead of having problems later, you have them right up front where your GPU is not showing up. I used to blame the risers, so I had to go through a whole stack of these, and of that entire stack, probably 50 of them, only 2 were actually bad. The risers can go out. This LED light on these red ones really help to see if it's got power and troubleshoot some other things, but it's so rare. But it can happen. So that's one thing to also check and look for. You can swap out a riser, and if you really think that's the issue. So the second thing that we're going to do when we troubleshoot, that first one with the burnt cables and checking the cabling, that's going to solve 95% of your problems literally. Almost all the systems I have running right now, if they go down, even if they're properly wired and they're not using max cables, max connectors, like I said, I had a 1500 watt PSU SATA cable burn out running 1 graphics card and a SATA hard drive on it. That's it. So now I try to go 1 per, if I have to 2 per, but I really try to avoid it because it can burn out. It's just less likely the less you use of the actual connectors. The second thing that I troubleshoot, mining settings. So say you're having 3080s and you got the standard build online, negative 200 on the core, plus 1200 on the memory, and you got 70 power, and that runs fine. That's a standard. You can see that pretty much everywhere. That's a standard way to run a 3080. Maybe it runs fine for 5-6 months, and then all of a sudden you got to restart the computer, or you go down there and it's off, or it's having errors. One of the cards isn't showing up properly. what happens, and you should have mining software that shows both your core heat temperature and your VRAM temperature. I know like the newer T-Rex will show both on these cards. You can have a cool core, but like your VRAM can be running really hot. I notice my VRAM, if I don't actually upgrade thermal pads on most of the cards that I buy, sits around 100 degrees Celsius. That's with open air and box fans just blowing through the channels in there to keep the air out. So they run on the warm side. And I just had this recently happen with one of my 3080s. It was running fine with the negative 200 plus 1200 configuration. I did some troubleshooting. I actually had to downgrade to negative 300 on the core, and then plus 1000 is what I went to for the memory. And this is a GPU. This is a mining rig that I had to go down and restart or try to troubleshoot like at least once a day. It just kept getting progressively worse. It's been running for a week solid. So that is also a possible solution. Your VRAM could have been excessively hot, and over time, after all that heat and electricity is flowing through it, it just degrades a little bit. So try either setting your mining rig back to factory defaults for the cards, or lowering some of those memory settings if possible. I know something like the 1660 Supers are already negative for both values, so obviously that's not going to work. One other thing that you can do with the mining settings is you can try lowering the power on the device if it's possible. Lower power will have less heat. It may solve your problems, but on the flip side of that, you may have to increase the power. For example, 3080, since that seems to be my favorite card, the standard power setting is 70%. Now I've noticed on some of the manufacturers, 70% doesn't quite cut it. Some of them need 71, 72, and up to 75% to run a stable load with the plus 1200 configuration. So those are two other things you can try to do. Factory settings always work. I know that's going to drop your hash rate and you're probably going to lose a lot of money for that period of time, but it saves a lot of troubleshooting. Those two issues alone, 99% of your problems are solved. However, there are phantom ghost issues, so continuing on is number 3, which I kind of hinted on or touched on a little bit, is make sure that your PSU can handle the power load. If you're constantly adding cards or changing settings, or even in the case where you have maybe a 6 or 12 rig, you have your power downgraded to whatever card you're using, could be anywhere from 60 to 70, 80% of the power, so the power's down. Sometimes your MSI afterburner or your clock settings will actually reset and come out of there, making all the cards run full power, which could trip your GPU if you were using near maximum of your PSU. If you're using near maximum power of your PSU in the first place. I've had that happen before. That's why I have the excessive amount where I have almost double the power I need, in case some of my 3080 or 3090 systems somehow lose their voltage settings, decreased voltage settings. But if you're adding cards, make sure that your power supply has enough to handle it and handle the surges. Just because your mining cards are cards are running 240 watts for a 3080 or 300 plus for a 3090, just because they run at that consistently while you're mining does not mean that they don't surge up to 400, 450 watts, and that can trip your power supply. So make sure your power supply is enough. Number 4, BIOS settings. Sometimes your BIOS settings aren't actually configured properly. When you set up a lot of new systems, or you set up a new system, sometimes you can plug all 6 GPUs in. It will start up and it will run. But what happens when it resets is all of a sudden it just drops a couple cards. So maybe you got 3, 4, 5 cards showing up. You may have to go into your BIOS settings and enable 4G encoding, set your PCI Express slots to 1x speed, generation 1 or whatever, turn your CSM off. It really varies based on the board that you have. So one way to find the information that you need for what your BIOS settings need to be is to type how to run 6 GPUs on a, insert your board name there. You're going to find Reddit and Google searches. What you're looking for is somebody that starts a thread. You can kind of see the previews that they say only 4 of my cards are showing up, or I can only get 3, 4, or 5 of my cards working. That's where you want to start with that thread, because the first 3 or 4 cards on a 6 PCI Express slot board normally always going to work without changing anything. To get those last 2, you got to tweak some of the settings and free up some of the bus. So that's the search you're looking for. And then and there is always the scenario where your BIOS settings did reset somehow, or you put the jumper on the wrong thing, or somehow, you know, you just could reset. Just random stuff like that seems to happen when it shouldn't. Those are the major troubleshooting steps that you need to take. However, there was a point in my mining career where I would actually like chase the rabbit down the hole. I would be like, well, this has a graphics error, so I would you know, use DDU, uninstall the drivers, reinstall the drivers, try older drivers. Especially if AMD cards, you need to have specific older drivers sometimes, or that used to be the case. Reset Windows, refresh Windows, reinstall Windows, update my mining software. I'm going to tell you that if your system is running already, it's an existing system, which is what this video is about, that's almost never going to be the problem. It's not really going to matter what drivers you have, especially for NVIDIA cards. It really doesn't matter how old they are. They're probably going to work, and it's probably not the problem. So don't chase those blue screen errors. Check all the things first: the burnt cables, the mining settings, the BIOS settings. Make sure you got your power supply. All that first before you get to actually where you're going to try to uninstall drivers or reinstall drivers. So those are the main troubleshooting problems. However, there are some other problems that you may be experiencing. So one of those is hash rate throttling. That usually happens on the more powerful cards. You know, say you got a 3090, it's supposed to go to 120, 122 mega hash. You get it, starts off that, and you just watch it drop. Comes down to 60, 70, 80, hovers there, maybe it goes up and down. That is 99.9% of the time it's a VRAM overheating issue. You probably will have to change thermal pads. One way to test this out is to actually get the box fan and just blast the card or through the channel of the card so the heat just gets out of there. See if it stabilizes your hash rate. See if it allows the hash rate to come back up consistently. That's how you can test that, but the throttling is almost always going to be a VRAM overheating issue. One other tip that I have for identifying cards: if you do think it's a specific card on the board and you're having a problem finding it, say your mining software says cannot find GPU 5, keep in mind that the GPUs are labeled differently than they are on MSI Afterburner, so that may be GPU 6 on the Afterburner program or app. And the one way to find that card is to go to GPU 6 and Afterburner, take off the auto fan, and either put it down to 0 or 100 and watch and see which card the fan stops or increases. You can even feel it. That's one way to help determine which GPU, if you think it's a GPU problem. Now obviously this is just covering those phantom or ghost issues, this video. That's what it's for. I'm expecting you to be able to see, like, hey, my fans aren't running, or other visual problems with your rig. I did not cover everything. I've been mining for a long time. I've gone through a lot of different operating systems, a lot of different configurations, I mean everything. So it's not all included in this video. So if you're experiencing problems still after going through these troubleshooting steps, go ahead and leave me a comment. It's more than likely that I can answer it or point you in the right direction. So thanks for watching. I hope you liked this video, and have a good day.